And 3, planning. While it may seem tedious on the front end and may seem like extra work, in the long run, I would argue that you will actually spend less time thinking about food, and ultimately that might even repair your relationship with food. We make so many decisions throughout the day. You make decisions on what to eat, what to wear. Should you put your hair up? Should you wear your hair down? When should you take a shower? When should you work out? Decisions at work, what to do with your kids. It's constant. So if you can put yourself in a situation where food becomes something that takes up less capacity in your brain, although on the front end it might seem like a lot, it's doing you a huge service in the long run. Because remember what I said at the very beginning of this. You are doing this either way for life, and you have a choice. Put in that little extra effort right now to make it easier in the long run.
Let's link up with Krysta on The Fix. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
What's going on, Fix listeners? Welcome to episode 78 of the Fix podcast. I'm your host, Krysta Huber, and we're solo for today's episode. I have not recorded a solo episode in several weeks, at least a month, but I am excited because I've been working with a bunch of clients over the summer, really building out the program, building out the Fitness FYX, getting into some repeat patterns of challenges and just different roadblocks that a lot of people face, particularly in the summer, and one that has come up in conversation multiple times in the same day that I'm recording this episode. So I was talking to a client and she worded it perfectly, and that is the title for this episode. It's managing the fuck it moments. And we all know what those are. Those moments when it is really easy to say to yourself, forget about it. Forget about this goal that I have and this situation and whatever I set my sights on, whether that's specifically fitness and workout related, whether that's nutrition related, whether it's mindset, stress management, all of the different levers that we can pull when it comes to our overall wellness and well-being. And I loved that she called it the fuck it moment because there's just no better way to describe it. I mean, if you think about it, that's exactly what goes through your mind when you're saying to yourself, oh, I happen to be following a specific set of macros and I tracked my food for the day, but my lunch meal wasn't really exactly what I intended to eat. And so because of that, I'm just going to say F it for the rest of the day and throw in the towel and just eat whatever I really want to eat. And what I want to examine throughout this conversation is first and foremost why that happens. And I can, of course, speak best from my own personal experience in somebody who has gone through her own transformation on more than one occasion. And I can also speak from the information that my clients share with me. And I've kind of boiled it down to about 3 different circumstances that I have found personally show up for me and the people that I work with on a regular basis. And in highlighting these, what I hope to accomplish throughout the rest of this episode is to help you reframe and to help you think about things in a different way so that you can either, 1, honestly justify some of those screw it moments, because sometimes they're warranted, and we'll get into what I mean by that. And 2, find other solutions, find other ways to be able to manage, lean on other tools, other options so that you can stay committed to whatever your specific set of goals are. So let's walk through some of these moments that we have. In my own experience, I can think of kind of 3 different buckets to put these into. I think of the emotional component. I think of the circumstantial, which is kind of tied to the emotional. And then I think of what I could kind of summarize as lack of goal setting and lack of really keeping your goals in mind. So the first one, the emotional, anytime that I've had a fuck it moment where it's really tied to, say, certain cravings, definitely has to do with something else that's going on in my day. And when I hear from clients is, oh, I've had a stressful day at work, or XYZ happened with my best friend, or this argument happened with my partner. And that's where food can come in, and that emotional relationship can really come out and just kind of say, hey, this food is going to make me feel better. And say, hey, in this moment, for me, if you guys have been listening to me for a while, follow any of my content on social media, one of my easiest fuck it moments, I usually do try to plan for it though, but the go-to food in that situation is something savory and salty. So I'm a big burger and fries kind of girl. Throwing a milkshake in there, it's game over. A lot of sometimes unnecessary calories when they're not planned for. And usually that can come at the end of just something that has to do with another component of my relationships or my environment that I'm in that is making me feel like in that moment, the food is going to make me feel better in some way. And I'll make the argument that it probably does. And honestly, for me, it's usually more than 5 minutes that it makes me feel better. Sometimes it's the whole next day. And sometimes it's a couple of days after that. And it could go so far as to say, you know what? I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this for the next week, month, whatever, however that might have impacted the long-term goal of where I'm trying to get to go. But before I offer the solution, I'm going to run through all these 3 different buckets. The second one, circumstantial, that I think has a lot to do with how your day went. That can be because, let's say, you were going out to eat, or you had a client lunch, or, something was supposed to be planned for a certain restaurant, and then your friends or whoever you were going out with decided to change it, and you didn't have that item on the menu that you were kind of hoping for. Or even I had a client say to me today, I can go into a restaurant with a plan and then I hear the specials and I'm like, change my mind. And that happens. And then the last one, when it comes to our goals and not understanding our goals, what I mean by that is those moments of giving yourself a little bit of slack, or even in a more understanding term and a kinder term to yourself, a moment of permission to decide that this is the food you want to eat. Or maybe even it's not so much your goals kind of being out of sight, or you forgetting about the framework of your goals and what's motivating you to be disciplined, keyword being disciplined in this situation, because as we know, motivation is fleeting. It's more so the fact that you are saying to yourself, oh, for some reason, I shouldn't be having this food. And for some reason, when I do have this food, it's in these moments of some of the other scenarios that I just described. So I do think all 3 of these things kind of go hand in hand. A lot of times we can't have one without the other. I would say in my experience, both personally and professionally, most people who have that emotional relationship with food, you're kind of one or the other. If you've never related to that or you've never been in that experience, it's not usually something that all of a sudden just happens, unless you have compounding levels of stress and stressful events or some major life changes, and maybe all of a sudden food becomes a coping mechanism for you. So it's either like you're totally in that category or you're not in that category at all. But then I think when it comes to the circumstances, that has a lot to do with your approach and some of the solutions and how you look at food and how you understand food. So we'll get to that in a second. The last one, though, is also kind of tied to that too, because we have to look at our goals and constantly be understanding of the fact that you can always move the goal line. So I'm going to kind of go backwards now from here and talk about how to work through these things. And I want to start with the one about your goals, because that's where I think people really get stuck. And that's where I think we beat ourselves up for these fuck it moments. And we tell ourselves that we failed because we gave into something, because we told ourselves, oh, I should not have had that thing. First and foremost, in the world of my philosophy of nutrition coaching and how I work with clients who are part of the Fitness FYX family, we don't believe in foods being inherently good or bad. Are some foods nutritionally better than others? They have more nutritional value? Yes. And I will not argue with anyone who says otherwise. That's very true. However, the labels of whether this food is a good food or X food is a bad food is where we can really get ourselves into sticky situations, because we've decided inherently that a food is off limits in some way, or it needs to be restricted in some capacity. Now, let's be honest. if you want to reach specific goals, and this is the big asterisk to all this, you have a specific timeline in which you want to reach them, then you have to understand that there's certain things. We can't eat everything all the time. You can have anything, but you can't have everything. And that's a mantra that I live by, among a few others that will probably come up throughout the rest of this episode. So, where we can help ourselves in better managing our goals and really ultimately managing our expectations is by understanding that that goal line can shift. And what I mean by that is that if you have the decision where, let's say, I feel like this is very timely and relevant in the summertime, especially in these next few weeks, the weather's going to start to change. People get this feeling of like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do all these things. Kids are going back to school. I won't be able to be as social. So you want to fit in all this different stuff. So you might say to yourself, okay, I'm okay with being a little bit less stringent on some of my choices and being a little bit looser in terms of the frequency with which I go out to eat or the number of alcoholic drinks I choose to have on a weekly basis, because I have a few more events before the end of the summer. And for me, I really want to enjoy those moments. There's nothing wrong with that mindset. Where it becomes a problem is when you also happen to be the person who will then wake up a week later and is asking yourself, well, why am I unhappy with the number on the scale? Or why am I unhappy with the way this certain outfit fits? Or, this picture that I took. I hear this from the ladies a lot, and I've definitely been in this headspace. I don't really like how I look in this picture. You have to remind yourself of those decisions that you made that, while they weren't necessarily bad ones, they didn't get you closer to your goal faster. So it doesn't mean that you failed. Instead, it just means you've extended that timeline a little bit. It just means that maybe that goal that you set for yourself, that certain body fat percentage or that certain outfit in your closet, or maybe that number on the scale or certain inches lost, muscle gained, whatever it is, just may take a couple weeks longer for you to be able to get there. And we lose sight of that so much because, one, instant gratification. And that's the toughest thing about wellness and fitness and nutrition. You have to put in all this work for delayed gratification. And we want everything right now. Think about the analogy of you're going shopping and you're going to the store. And let's say you go buy something. One of the hardest parts about even selling nutrition coaching is I could go sell this necklace that I happen to have on, and when I bought it, it gave me instant gratification. Oh, I really liked it. It looks cute. I'm happy. Instead, with losing body fat and changing your physique and trying to reach PRs in the gym, that takes work consistently and frequently over extended periods of time. And guess what? It's going to take work for the rest of your life. But instead of thinking about it that way and be like, oh, well, that sucks, it's all about the reframe. It's all about saying to yourself, well, how can I think about this in a way that it's like, well, why don't I try to enjoy this? Why don't I think about this situation knowing that it is something that I'm going to be in for life? And because I know I'm going to be in it for life, let me make it fun, but let me also understand that I don't have to be in such a rush to get there. At the same time, though, if you do have certain goals, let's say you're working towards an event or, a certain milestone in your life, you reach a certain age, you celebrate a certain birthday, or maybe you feel that you need to put a timeline on something because you have to give yourself that structure to be able to fully commit to it, that is okay too. But those are the situations where you have to start tallying up the fuck it moments. And you have to start asking yourself, have I had 3 or 4 fuck it moments in the same week? And then did I do that again the next week? A lot of times I see this with people habitually on the weekends. What happens is Monday through Thursday, things are looking good. You may be tracking your macros, you're keeping track of how much protein you're consuming, you're hitting your workouts, you're getting your steps in, hydrating, checking all the boxes, all the things. And then the weekend rolls around, even by Friday morning, and you're like, oh, well, I'm not going to have my usual breakfast. I'm going to go to this coffee shop that happens to have these really good donuts, and I'm also going to get the donut. And then all of a sudden your friend texts you to go grab lunch and you decide to get a sandwich. And then that turns into you going out to dinner a couple drinks later. And then all of a sudden you do that same thing on Saturday. And then the same thing happens on Sunday. Okay, maybe that's one weekend. Maybe there was a special event. Maybe you were going on vacation. But what happens when that happens 3 out of the 4 weekends every month? It's pure math. Now, by that compounding effect, all of a sudden you have 2-3 days, let's say 2 on average, minimum, of the 30 days you have in a month, and you do that 4 times, now there's 8 out of those 30 days that you had a fuck it moment. Probably multiple. You probably had 3 fuck it moments. So let's say you had 24 fuck it moments over the course of that month. That's what adds up. And quite frankly, as harsh as this may sound, does not give you the right to be frustrated when you don't hit a certain goal within a certain timeline, because you have to be willing to do the work. Somebody like a coach, like myself, can hand you the playbook and can guide you and support you and give you accountability and hold your hand and provide all the resources, the recipes, the tools, what have you. But you have to be the one to make those decisions in that moment. And you can often think to yourself, what I like to say to my clients is, when we think about restaurants, like, ask yourself, what do you think I would do in that situation? Talk through it with me once or twice, especially when we first start working together and communicating. And then next time, you'll know exactly how to think about it. Now, for our other 2 categories, again, working backwards, going into the circumstances situation, this is a lot more, kind of what I just covered has to do with the mindset. This has a lot more to do with the practical, the action steps, the tools that we can use. Now, first and foremost, a lot of these circumstantial things come from a lack of planning or surprise. And one of the best ways to help yourself achieve your goals is through planning. I personally encourage my clients to track their food for this exact reason, plus the fact that, another mantra of mine, we can't manage what we don't measure. So if we don't keep track of our food take in any kind of way, and I'm working to guide somebody through a certain calorie intake and ultimately a certain amount of protein, carbs, and fat, I might be setting them up for total failure because I'm basing that off of what I think they should be eating by a few calculations and a little bit of feedback in terms of what their lifestyle is like, how they're training, what their stressors are, etc. Versus me having them also help themselves by understanding, okay, what does my actual current intake really look like? Because we spend a lot of time thinking, oh, I'm eating X amount of food. And then we start putting pen to paper. We start using MyFitnessPal, and it's like, oh, wait a second, that's actually what I'm eating. Sneaky calories in condiments, sneaky calories in dressing, tracking alcohol to account for those empty calories. And all of a sudden, it kind of adds up really quickly. Or all of a sudden, we see a clear gap in that. We may have a bias towards carbs being bad and shying away from foods that are really healthy for you, like fruit and vegetables, or instead relying a lot on foods that are higher in fat. A lot of the what are called hyper palatable foods, or those foods that, think like chips and pretzels and things like that, where you take one out of the bag and all of a sudden you chew it and it tastes really good and you want more. And then you chew it again and you want more. Higher in fat, maybe higher in carbs in some situations too. And maybe a lot of our calories, while we think we're not eating that much, the foods that we're eating are dense, and that adds up as well. And then we're not hitting our protein goals. We think we might be getting 25, 30 grams of protein in per serving per meal, but we're not. We, instead of guessing, we can do ourselves a favor by spending a little bit of time tracking. And I've talked about this on this podcast before. It's probably something I'll talk about for years to come, but it really grinds my gears when people shit on food tracking, because it doesn't have to be something that becomes such a crutch. It truly can be a tool because it provides self-awareness. There's so many other things you do in your life, whether we can talk about finances, or we can use the example of being a professional. When you're at work and you get reviewed, that's a way of auditing yourself. Why can't we do the same with food? Why do we have to turn it into this thing that's like horrible and causes poor relationships with food? That's a choice. It's a choice that you get to that state because you don't spend time learning how to just use it as a tool. And it can be a tool in some of these fuck it moments, because what you can do is you can choose to track the food to bring yourself the awareness of, oh, wait a second, was this choice really that bad? Or it can help you understand that maybe sometimes when you go out to dinner, that salad that you think is going to be super healthy and really low calorie because of the nuts and the dressing and avocado and other ingredients that it has, maybe has more calories than you choosing to get a cheeseburger. And that's where that awareness is really helpful. And learning how to bake in moments of consciously choosing not to track your food because you're enjoying an event, or you really want to learn how to not track it. You understand that, hey, vegetables tomatoes, broccoli, carrots, lettuce, they don't really put that big of a dent in your carb budget. So if you don't track them, okay, maybe we don't know exactly what your fiber intake was for the day, but that's definitely not the reason that you overate, literally not possible, in terms of vegetables, is the reason why you're not losing body fat. That's a way to look at it differently. And the circumstances can be used to our advantage by having a tool like a MyFitnessPal on your phone and saying to yourself, let me compare a couple options. Let me figure out, based on what I already ate today, what's the best choice for me? And in doing that, it also helps you avoid your hunger being an emergency, because when you start to track your food, you get a better definition of what's actually in your food. So rather than thinking about what you need to eat, you're thinking strategically about how to eat. And what I mean by that is the more you track, the more you have a list in your head of go-to food items that X food is protein, X food is representative of a carbohydrate, X food is representative of a fat. When you build up that knowledge and you bring that education and you throw out the tracking component of it entirely, you bring that education to a table when you're out to eat, when you can't be there going back and forth in your phone, you put yourself in a better situation because you're more educated in the choices that you're making. You have, again, better self-awareness of what's actually making up your food. And that's really powerful stuff. That's not something that should be demonized. That's not something that should be looked down upon, like making you too anal or labeling someone as being too intense or obsessed with what they're putting into their bodies. The other piece of it is the fact that planning also allows you to eat the foods that you want to eat, so you avoid the likelihood of those fuck it moments happening, because it teaches you what else you need to consume in a day when you know you're going out to eat and you know there's like a certain menu item that you just really want to have, and you're willing to set aside your specific macros or calories for that certain food. And if you want to learn a little bit more specifically about how I handle eating out, I did a few episodes back in December of 2021 around this topic, and I'll link them down in the show notes so that you can kind of dive into that topic a little bit further, so I won't go too far down this rabbit hole. But it's a really good way to, again, provide yourself with your own support and help keep yourself honest in the decisions that you're making. The other piece is a lot of this has to just do with social events, and it has to do with the fact that I was having a conversation with a client today. She was hosting something. People came over, they brought food with them. Somebody offered them something. They're like, you know what? That sounds really good right now. Again, that goes back to asking yourself, what's that reframe? Am I okay with this decision? It's not the one decision in isolation. It's not that one decision by itself is going to take you 3 steps backward. It's just another stop along the path that you're on. And that's okay, because that's life. That's where I really dislike the term, oh, I fell off the wagon because I had these people visiting, and then I went out to this event, and then this happened at work, and this happened. There's no wagon that you fell off. This is your life. This is what happens. And what you're better off saying to yourself is, that's a choice I made today, and that's cool. And tomorrow I might decide to make a different choice. But if I make the same choice again, and then I do it again, and I look at, okay, maybe I have an average eating 3 times a day. Going back to the math, let's keep it purely numbers, more concrete, easier to follow. I'm eating 21 meals a week. Do I have 7 meals that I'm kind of like saying F it? Or do I only have 3 meals that I'm kind of saying F it? Because if you only have 3, that puts you a lot better off than maybe the version of yourself that before you had any awareness around this, before you worked with a coach, would have had 7 to 10. And that differential, that decision in changing where you were before is exactly how you move that goalpost. And again, it also just helps you navigate those situations in the future. It also helps to have somebody to talk about it too, because then you can come up with some of these tools and strategies, just like hopefully listening to this podcast will help you do too. And then there's the last one, the emotional component. The best advice that I can give in these situations is finding a replacement activity for the choice to maybe binge eat or eat something that in 5 minutes or 5 days or 5 weeks or 5 months, you're not going to be super happy with having made that decision. That can be as simple as walking out of the kitchen or walking out of that room or taking a couple deep breaths. Box breathing is a really great tool. I'll link down in the show notes how to exactly do it, but it's super simple. You breathe in for 4, you hold it for 4, you exhale for 4, and then you do it again. Taking a minute to just kind of start identifying your surroundings, asking yourself and how you feel. What am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling this way? Is this decision to eat this certain food going to help me feel better? And if the answer is yes, say, okay, it's going to help me feel better right now, right? Will I feel that way in 5 minutes? Will I feel that way in 5 months? Push that timeline out and ask yourself if it's going to help you feel okay. You can go for a walk. I don't love the advice of drinking water because I think that's kind of silly. I think if you feel like, even if it's emotional and you do feel like you're hungry, I actually think something you're better off doing is eating, but honoring yourself with a meal that is going to make you feel your best. And you know what that is. And you also know what your goals are that you have to stick to. So, short and sweet episode for you guys today. Hope you find this helpful. Just to kind of wrap it up, think about these situations that you have, the emotional drivers, the circumstantial drivers, and the goal setting component of all this. A lot of times they kind of all intersect at once, but the best choice that you can make and the best thought process to keep in mind is just understanding that 1, nothing happens in a vacuum. 2, for that same reason, it's all relative. And 3, planning, while it may seem tedious on the front end and may seem like extra work, in the long run, I would argue that you will actually spend less time thinking about food. And ultimately, that might even repair your relationship with food. We make so many decisions throughout the day. You make decisions on what to eat, what to wear. Should you put your hair up? Should you wear your hair down? When should you take a shower? When should you work out? Decisions at work, what to do with your kids. It's constant. So if you can put yourself in a situation where food becomes something that takes up less capacity in your brain, although on the front end, it might seem like a lot, it's doing you a huge service in the long run. Because remember what I said at the very beginning of this. You are doing this either way for life, and you have a choice. Put in that little extra effort right now to make it easier in the long run, especially if maybe you're at a point in your life where you are only worrying about you. You're single, you don't have children, you're really focused on your career. It's a little bit easier for you to reach your nutrition goals. If you can prioritize this right now and make this your non-negotiable, it will serve you. I have often hear from moms that they go through periods where they say to themselves, oh, in the past, it was easier for me to work out. And they tend to forget that they're now managing so many other things and other people and other people's schedules that they don't give themselves permission to be like, wait a second, I might need to relearn this. And I might need to use different tools that I didn't have to rely on before because my circumstances were totally different. But if you can remember that feeling and you can remember, hey, at the time when I was working out, that me time made me show up better in my relationships personally and professionally, that's going to be your driver for making the best decisions for you going forward. So, little food for thought, something to keep in mind as you roll through the last couple weeks of summer. If you have questions, if you want to dive a little bit more into any of this, I am currently accepting new clients for the fall. Would love to hear from you. Book a complimentary consult with me. You can either shoot me a DM at the Krysta Huber or at the fix.officialpod on Instagram, or go to my website, which is linked down in the show notes, www.thefitnessfix.com. And if you missed our last episode 2 weeks ago with my friend Ellie, I did a special plug at the very beginning that I'd be remiss not to include here at the end of this one about my new program through Upswing Fitness. So if you're interested in online workouts, more to come. If you want early access, click the link down in the show notes and you can get into what is called our Up Space for the Fitness Fix, where you'll get access to programming. It'll be a mix of bodyweight workouts, barbells, dumbbells, at home, in the gym, whatever you have access to. I'm really excited to continue to build that out. We're going to work on a nutrition component to it as well. I think recipes, some macro basics, kind of macronutrient 101, and more to come. So if you have any interest in that, any questions on that, again, shoot me a DM. Go check out the links down in the show notes. And from wherever you're listening, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.